Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the USDA Prospective Planting and March 1 Grain Stocks Report webinar. It's a mouthful. My name is Andy Miller with DTN, and I'll be your moderator today. And with me, as always, is Todd Hultman, Lead Market Analyst for DTN. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that everyone is in a listen-only mode, but we do encourage you to ask questions at any time during the event. To do this, click on the chat icon located on the bottom right of your screen. This will open a messaging panel where you can write and direct your question to the webinar panelists. We'll also address all questions at the end of the webinar after Todd finishes sharing his report. And one last item to know is that this event is being recorded, and we will have a rebroadcast link up on the DTN website within the next 48 hours. So that's the basics. I'm going to turn it over to Todd.
Thank you, Andy. Good morning, or good afternoon, I should say, for many. And thank you for joining our Prospective Plantings and March 1 Grain Stocks look at USDA's numbers here today for March 1st. As you might know, a lot of us analysts don't have a lot of regard for the Prospective Plantings estimate, and it's not that we think anybody's cheating or intentionally lying or anything like that, but it's just very difficult to get a handle on planting in early March when you don't yet know just how the weather conditions are going to play out through the planting season. So we always take these numbers with a grain of salt is what I'm trying to say. But if anything, they do give us maybe a general idea. It's based on a survey of 73,000 plus producers giving us their planting intentions. And of course, like anyone that has kids in school, sometimes there's a difference between intentions and the homework that actually gets done. So with that in mind, we'll take a look at this in just a second. I also want to mention that from an analyst view, the grain stocks report is some of the most important information USDA gives us. And I'm very glad to see that we have another update of that number today. This is a report I wish came to us monthly. I think it would help all of our estimates stay a lot more accurate and help our understanding of actual supplies stay a lot better. But at least they come quarterly, and we'll take a look at what USDA said today. So with that little introduction, let's go ahead and move forward and take a look at what USDA said plantings will look like in 2023 based on their producer survey. Corn acres came in a little higher than expected at 92 million. Soybean acres a little less than expected at 87.5 million. And wheat acres came in slightly higher than expected at 49.9 million acres. Of course, we did have a January report of winter wheat acres, so we knew that those totals were going to be up already. Now, again, these are the intentions, but as you know, we're going to have some weather challenges in front of us, and in the southwestern plains, where a lot of that winter wheat is, we already have some serious weather challenges to planting activity. But this is the early glimpse. So far, 92 million on corn. And that's a number that, if we have good weather this year, is going to support a much higher increase in our corn ending stocks for the new season. Soybeans should, if we have good weather, could keep ending stocks somewhat more under control. But of course, we always have increasing demand from the soybean oil side with renewable diesel expansion going on. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out this spring when we actually do get to planting. And for many in the north, that's obviously still going to be a ways off. Oh, I should also mention the three crop total came in just over 229 million acres. That was the highest in 9 years. So that's one of the suspicions I have also, is not just how many of these acres will survive the weather, but will a 229 million acre total actually survive when we get to actual planting. That remains to be seen. Okay, I think I jumped yeah, okay. Let's take a look at what USDA said they found as far as the state breakdowns go. And this chart shows last year's top producing corn states from 2020-22 and the changes that are expected this year. And you see the biggest changes in the state of Minnesota, where they're looking for an increase of 350,000 corn acres. Iowa and Illinois both looking for an increase of 200,000 corn acres, and Indiana also looking for a bump there, 250,000 acres higher. Now, to nobody's surprise, Iowa and Illinois will still be the king corn states as far as planted acres are going. Iowa looking for a 13.1 million acre total, Illinois at 11 million acres. But across the board, basically all the top states showing an increase except for Nebraska, where we're showing an expected decrease of 100,000 acres. Let's take a look at soybeans now. I'm going the wrong direction, sorry about that. The breakdown for soybeans, we have blank spots for Illinois and Iowa. Those acreage totals are going to stay the same this year, according to USDA survey. That's 10.8 million for Illinois and 10.1 million for Iowa. We'll show a small increase in Minnesota, small decreases in Missouri and Indiana. North Dakota and South Dakota stay unchanged, Nebraska and South Dakota stay unchanged. But North Dakota shows a big increase of over 800,000 acres, coming in with a total over 6.5 million acres. So they're looking for a jump in soybean acres in North Dakota. I have to wonder if that has to do possibly with the expectation that they're going to be planting a little later than usual with all the snow that they have on the ground right now. So that may be part of that factor there. Let's look now at the wheat breakdown categories. For winter wheat total, USDA estimated 37.5 million acres. That was roughly just over 1 million acres more than expected in today's report. And of course, it's up over 4 million acres from what winter wheat plantings were a year ago. Again, there's a big weather factor adding a big question mark on those planted acres, or we could call them survivable acres. A lot of those might not probably won't make it to harvested acres. On the other spring wheat total side, we saw the planting estimate come in at 10.57 million acres. That was slightly less than expected and down about just over 250,000 acres from a year ago. I was scrambling at the end of our time here trying to see where that put it in terms of historically, and as far as I can tell, that is the lowest spring wheat acre planting estimate since 1972, if that number holds true. So 10.57 million acres, the lowest in many, many years, if that holds true. And we do have Minneapolis wheat trading higher today. Durham acres, 1.78 million, came in above expectations. That's also up almost 150,000 acres from a year ago. So that is the breakdowns we have here. A little higher winter wheat acres and record low in the spring wheat category. Other U.S. crops I thought I'd just throw out here. The biggest change, obviously to note, is in cotton acres. Cotton acres were 13.76 million last year. And actually, sorry, I did a little mistake on my chart. I actually labeled last year's numbers, not this year's numbers. So I'll try to make up for that here verbally. The new estimate for cotton is 11.26 million acres. That's down 2.5 million from a year ago. In sorghum, we're slightly lower. We're down to 5.98 million acres. In barley, slightly lower, 2.92 million. Oats are slightly higher, 2.67 million acres. Canola, slightly higher at 2.27. Sunflowers, a little lower at 1.36. And, I skipped rice, sorry. Rice, 2.58 million acres, a little higher. So really outside of cotton and sorghum, the changes were very small overall. I think the main thing here is the contribution that cotton acres are making to the corn and wheat totals, most likely here in 2023. Obviously, I have to mention the planting obstacle. We have a lot of snow on the ground still in the Dakotas, or at least the northeastern corner of South Dakota, along with North Dakota, and much of Minnesota and northern Wisconsin. It's going to take some time, and the forecast obviously is not favorable in terms of much snow melt here the next couple weeks. So it could be into May before we get to planting. The forecast, by the way, for May does look better with warmer temperatures expected, but it is going to take a time before we can see activity in the fields in the northern plains. And obviously, we have to recognize we have serious drought still hanging on in the southwestern plains. Kansas, obviously, one of the largest producers of U.S. wheat in this country, usually produces anywhere between 15 and 22% of the country's wheat crop, having very difficult times and does not have a good forecast looking ahead. So even though we see higher winter wheat acres expected, I don't think it should actually have much bearish effect on the outlook for wheat because of this. All right, moving from the planting estimates, let's take a look at what USDA said for March 1 grain stocks today. And we'll start with corn. Corn stocks came in just over 7.4 billion bushels. That was slightly less than expected. It's the lowest total in 9 years. And so actually that's on a little more of a bullish path than the ending stocks is estimating in corn. So it'll be interesting to see how corn plays out the rest of the year. As you probably know, we've had pretty strong interest from China the past couple weeks. We've seen 12 export sales of old crop corn here in just over a 2-week time period. China fessing up to 11 of those sales. So we have seen a pickup in corn exports. But I think the good news for the corn producers today is a recognition in this grain stocks report that there is active demand, even though export sales before China started showing up have really been dragging and are still down roughly a third from a year ago. So still domestically very strong demand for corn, and that's keeping the stocks down. So that's slightly friendly to those old crop corn prices, whereas the planting estimates were certainly bearish for the new crop prices. As we take a look at soybean stocks here today, that number also came in lower than expected. 1.685 billion bushels is the second lowest total in 7 years. Now keep in mind, USDA's ending stocks estimate of 210 million bushels is the lowest in 7 years. So soybeans still has a little bit of ground to make up if they're going to get as tight as USDA is expecting by August 31st. So we still have 2 quarters left of demand in front of us. And of course, with Brazil's record harvest, the export activity has really fallen off in U.S. soybeans as we normally expect it to this time of year. So still on pace. It still seems quite obvious that we're going to have a tight supply situation this summer, but this report makes me wonder if we might not come in as tight as the 210 million bushels that USDA is expecting. We'll see. There's certainly a strong argument to be made yet for crush demand. On the wheat stocks, the question was, are wheat stocks as tight as USDA has been estimating? And USDA's ending wheat stocks are estimated at the lowest in 15 years. Well, this report today seems to still support that. Wheat stocks for March 1st came in at 946 million bushels. That was slightly higher than the 928 expected, but not a big difference. And it is still the lowest wheat stocks for this state in the past 15 years. So that ending stocks estimate for wheat still continues to be on track with just 1 quarter remaining in the wheat's marketing season. 946 million bushels. So U.S. wheat stocks are genuinely tight. Even though we haven't seen a whole lot of export activity, there is demand in the country. Seems a little shorter than usual today, but of course it's not a WASDE report. It's just a planning and a stocks report. In conclusion, I would call today's report bearish for corn. That's the new crop corn side, of course, with that higher planting estimate of 92 million acres. If you pencil that out with good weather, we're going to have at least 2 billion bushel carry this fall, if not more. So it's all going to be up to weather this summer, and we'll be watching that. Slightly lower than expected U.S. corn stocks is certainly helpful to the old crop price of corn. So we do have a bit of a two-way street here going between old crop and new crop influences. For soybeans, today's report was bullish, we have to say, that lower than expected planting total of 87.5 million acres is modestly bullish for the new season, even if we do have good weather. And today's soybean stocks were lower than expected, so we do expect these supplies to be tight this year. U.S. wheat acres higher than expected today, but, and of course the but, and I didn't finish the sentence there on the graphic, but the big but is weather. So what is weather going to allow to be planted? So even though we're not expecting to plant too many spring wheat acres, will all of them be able to get planted in time? If you remember, we had kind of a similar situation last year where a lot of that spring wheat didn't get planted until about the first or second week of May, and it turned out okay, but it was a bit of a rush at the end. And then lastly, the fact that we still have U.S. wheat stocks estimated lowest in 15 years does seem supportive for prices. So we'll see what traders can do with that moving forward. Our next WASDE report is on Friday, April 11, but this is a great time if you have any questions now, Andy.
Yes, the report may have been shorter today, but you have more questions than usual, so you're going to make up for it, maybe.
All right, fair enough.
All right, we've got I think 5 so far, and obviously anyone who's listening, please enter any additional questions you have. We'll certainly get to all of them with the time we have, unless Todd talks too much, which no, he won't do that. What is the so first question? What is the status of a strike in Argentina?
The status of a strike is, it sounds like that's a threat right now. And my question is, were we expecting much crush out of those plants anyway? Argentina's in a situation where their soybean supplies are so tight, they're going to have to bring soybeans down from Brazil to keep their crush plants running. The strike is a threat, though. Their economy is a mess down there. Their inflation is way out of control, much more than anything we're dealing with here, and that messes up, of course, the wages and income that the workers have. So we've seen this strike threat before, and it is something they'll have to deal with. It does, I think, add to the situation of overall tightness and less competition coming from Argentina this year, but we'll just have to see how it plays out. But just the fact that Argentina has such a serious drought already this year, it's kind of like a tiny factor on top of an elephant of a factor.
Okay. Next question for you. We're going to stay international here. Will the Ukraine get crops planted with all the unexploded ordnance and landmines in the farm fields? Sticky situation.
Yeah, my guess is no. Now, I can tell you earlier this year, the winter wheat planting estimates, and by the way, it's the winter wheat that's really in harm's way as far as where the fighting's been intense and where the landmines are most populated in southern and eastern Ukraine. Earlier this year, those winter wheat planting estimates were coming in about 40% lower than a year ago. And then just recently, we heard from the ag minister of Ukraine, and he was saying something more on hand of being down about 20% from a year ago. Now, God bless them. I don't know if they're just trying to do a little bit of cheerleading and helping rally the team here a little bit with an optimistic forecast. But given everything they're going through, I still tend to think the 40% reduction is probably a more accurate figure of the wheat plantings this year. So time will tell. We'll have to see on that. As far as the corn crop goes, it's in more of north central Ukraine. And I do think that the corn crop definitely will do better as far as wheat. But in both cases, the finances situation is getting very tight. It's difficult to get credit And there seems to be some consensus that a lot of the farmers are going toward planting more of the oil seed type things like sunflower and even possibly soybeans for soybean oil because they find it easier to sneak out of the country to the west than corn and wheat.
Got it. And next question actually is also related to wheat, which is did we hear you make a comment that not all winter wheat acres may be harvested this season?
Yeah, so I mean, if you see the Sahara Desert down in Texas Panhandle and southwestern Kansas, a lot of those wheat acres that were planted are simply not going to produce a crop. I think that's no surprise to anybody. So at this point, it's a little difficult to focus on the planted acres when you have this extreme drought situation that is going to hit the harvested acres pretty hard.
And another question is, how much corn is normally exported to Mexico?
Roughly 16 million metric ton. Let me quickly do the math here. So roughly 600 to 700 million bushels of corn to Mexico. And I imagine in the question that you're wondering about the situation where Mexico is banning the import of GMO corn. And yeah, that remains a very serious concern. I have to think, or maybe want to think, that they'll still maintain an exemption for their livestock guys because they're in a situation where if they don't have our U.S. corn for livestock, I don't know where they're going to get it because South America's GMO corn just like us. So their livestock producers especially are the ones that are going to suffer most from this political move against GMO corn. So I'm still somewhat hopeful that they'll give them an exemption for that, and that'll maintain the bulk of the 600 million bushel trade. But obviously, there's still going to be a lot challenged in the free trade agreement that we have with Canada and Mexico. And really, it sounds like all the rules are on our side. So until they can come up with a scientific reason for not having GMO corn, I'd still like to believe this is going to work out okay in the end.
Okay, next question. We've actually had a couple more come in too. So,
Okay.
So next question is to achieve what I think what they're asking is to achieve a $2 billion bushel carry out in corn that assumes 183 yield, correct?
Yeah, and earlier this year I did a 185 yield, which is, I believe, if I remember, 3% above trend line. And so I should let you know that DTN's weather team is looking for good weather this year throughout most of the Corn Belt, except for Nebraska might be down and Kansas might be down because the southwestern plains are still going to be dry overall. But we should have a much better yield and production season than we saw a year ago. And I started with that high 185 estimate just to kind of wake people up as to the possibilities before us if we do have a good weather season, because it's something we haven't really had for a little bit. So we definitely are within striking distance, and it certainly remains possible that with good weather, we'll be back to a 2 billion bushel plus surplus.
Okay. Soybean question. If the weather helps, is it feasible to project a 52 BPA yield for soybeans?
Yeah, I think 54 is even feasible with good weather, and wouldn't rule it out. We have a tendency sometimes after we go through, after we've taken some hot and dry hits, that we forget how good a good weather crop can be. Well, we've had years in the past where we've had 6 to 10% yields above the trend line. So I mean, good weather can be quite the producer when it hits right.
All right, last question for you. What are your thoughts on Cargill and Viterra leaving Russia? Is it significant?
Overall, I don't think it is. And not that those aren't two important traders for Russia. They are. I think they're number 4 and number 6 on their top 10 or something like that. But it seems quite likely to me that even as those two step away, that they will still find uses for that infrastructure, and they'll find a team to replace. And Viterra specifically has said that it doesn't mean that they'll stop doing business or buying wheat from Russia, but they are prepared to step away from those export facilities. So I think even without Cargill and Viterra, someone will step in and do that.
Good deal. All right, well, that finishes our questions. I'm going to just go ahead and thank everyone for joining today and just give you a quick reminder that this has been recorded and we'll have a rebroadcast link up on DTN within the next 48 hours. And Todd, I don't know if you want to advance the slide one more. You're usually...
Oh, yes. I forget that last one. Sorry, Andy.
Yep. And I think it's gracious you give your contact information to just and let everyone know that they can reach out to you if they have any additional questions. So with that said, we'll conclude our event, and I'll say thank you one more time. Thanks for joining. Have a great day.
Thank you all.